So we are glad to have us tonight, Dr. Alexandra Berzin, to give us a talk entitled A History of Buddhism, how the Tibetan Zen and Theravadin traditions fit together. So brothers and sisters in the Dhamma, please welcome Dr. Alexandra Berzin.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm very happy to be with all of you here this evening. The way that I like to start my talks is the way that in the Tibetan tradition we usually begin any meditation session. And that's to start by focusing on the breathing. As you know, in all the various Buddhist traditions, there are a lot of practices and meditations which are done with the breath. There's the usual type of practices of focusing on the breath as a manner of gaining concentration. But here, what this particular practice, which is used to begin a session, is intended for is to be able to make a space in between what we had been doing and what we're about to do. And the technique for it is to focus on the breathing, the sensation through our nostrils, so we breathe in and out, and to count the breath. And so we breathe out and in and count that as 1, out and in 2, out and in 3, like that up to 11, and it's usually repeated 2 or 3 times. The theory is that it is difficult for us to concentrate on several things at the same time. Therefore, if we're focusing on the sensation of the breath through our nostrils and counting, then that doesn't leave much room in our minds for us to continue to have thoughts of worries or anxieties concerning what we had been doing before. But if we continue the practice for too long, then it defeats the purpose and we get bored with it, and our mind tends to wander back with various thoughts and worries. So that's why it's only done up to 11, 2 or 3 times. It's a very useful technique also for being able to disengage ourselves from what had been going on before and what we're about to do. That can be useful for getting into a meditation session, getting into listening to a teaching, or it can be applied in any type of situation in life. When we want to sit down, for instance, in an office and begin to type, or we're typing a paper at university, or anything like that, to be able to get our energies completely into that and not have our minds still wandering off about our last telephone conversation or what we were doing before. It's also a very useful technique for calming down, particularly when impulses of anger come to our mind. If we take the time out to put some space in between what we had been doing, some space between when that impulse comes to our mind and when we would actually act it out, then it tends to take the energy out from it. It tends to weaken that energy if we've put that space in there of focusing on the breathing. It also tends to connect us more to our body, which tends to bring us more down to earth rather than flying off in some emotional rage. And it is very useful for being able then to handle a difficult situation. So it's a useful technique. So we can see breathing meditations are used for many, many different purposes. So we'll begin with counting the breath like this. We breathe just normally, not holding our breath, not breathing in an unnatural way, and out and in. I'll count that as 1, out and in 2, up to 11, and we'll repeat that twice. And then the next thing that we do is set the intention, which is a way of getting our energy going in a certain direction when, again, we're about to start doing something. And so we set an intention to concentrate, to listen to what is going to be discussed, and to listen to this with the idea of being able to learn various techniques, various explanations of how things fit together, so that we can overcome our various limitations, realize our various potentials, so that we can be of more benefit to others. And so set an intention to listen to this, in order to grow more so that we can be of benefit to everyone. This evening, the topic that we're going to be talking about is a history of Buddhism, to get a general idea of how various things fit together. And I'll explain things from a historical point of view as is approached in Tibetan Buddhism, since this is the main source of where I myself have done my own personal studies. And from the way that the history is described, the Buddha was somebody, as we all know, who was no god, no creator, or anything like that, but who lived in India about 2,500 years ago. And while he was alive, the Buddha taught all the various Buddhist teachings. He taught the teachings which later became codified as the Hinayana, those that became the Mahayana, and those that became the Vajrayana or Tantrayana. All of these were taught, and nothing was actually written down while the Buddha was alive. The way that the teachings were given was organized in terms of what's usually called the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, which could be translated slightly differently as setting flow 3 rounds of transmission. Now, these 3 rounds of transmission were, first of all, the first round, the Buddha taught the 4 Noble Truths, and spoke in terms of what the prominent sutra for that is the Dharmachakra Sutra. In this, the Buddha explained about problems that we all face and the causes for them, that it's possible to achieve a stopping of these problems, and the way to do that is to follow a pathway of working to eliminate the causes. You get rid of the cause, you get rid of the problem. Very realistic type of approach. Then the second round of transmission, the Buddha taught primarily what's known as the Prajnaparamita Sutras. Those are the sutras of the far-reaching discriminating awareness, or the perfection of wisdom, in which the Buddha taught primarily about the deepest level discussion of reality or voidness, in which he presented the whole discussion of how everything exists with an absence of fantasized ways of existing. When we speak about voidness or emptiness in Buddhism, we're not speaking about nothingness, we're speaking about an absence. We're speaking about how often we have all sorts of projected, fantasized ways in which we imagine things to exist, and none of these are referring to anything real. We could imagine, for instance, that I'm a monster, but and that could cause us to have a great deal of anxiety, all sorts of negative thoughts about ourselves, but that's not referring to anything real. Nobody exists as a monster. The second round of transmission then is speaking about this far-reaching discriminating awareness or wisdom. The third round of transmission is usually referring to the Sandhi Nirmochana Sutra. This is that's the main sutra that was given, in which the Buddha presented what's known as the Chittamatran teachings, the mind-only teachings, in which the Buddha presented the explanation of how things exist in relation to the mind and in relation to appearances. Now, often we're going to we're going to meet different explanations as to which of these rounds of transmission was the most definitive. And sometimes, in a lot of traditions, in the Tibetan tradition, we'll see that the second round is the supreme teaching, because in the first round, the Buddha spoke about how things do exist from their own side. In the third round, he spoke about how some things exist from their own side, other things don't. And in the middle round, the second round, he said that nothing exists from its own side. So speaking on that level, people say the second round was the most definitive. But in other traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, they'll say that the third round was definitive. That was the supreme one. When they say that, then they're defining the third round differently. They're defining the third round as speaking in terms of the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. This is the Sutra on Buddha nature, in which the Buddha then discusses about the subtlest level of mind and all the factors within us that can lead to enlightenment, and he's hinting at the deepest level explanations that we find in Tantra. So because of that, some of the traditions are going to say that the third round is definitive. Now, this is a very good example of how we, on the surface, seem to have certain disagreements in some of the Buddhist traditions as to what is the definitive teachings of the Buddha. And on the surface, it looks as though it's quite a disagreement, because one says it's the second round, and the others say that it's the third. But if we look more closely at what are the sutras which are actually being included in the second and third, and what is the point of the teaching, what is the intention of the Buddha in each of these rounds, then we see that, in fact, they're defining them differently. Because they're defining the rounds differently, therefore they can speak about it in different terms, as one being more definitive than the other. But if we actually look at the contents of the material, then we would see that, in fact, there's no disagreement, because everybody would say that it's more definitive to say that everything exists not from its own side, and furthermore, everybody would say that it's more definitive, more deep, to speak about the more subtle forms, the more subtle levels of consciousness. So this is a very good example of what will be most productive in our study of all the different traditions of Buddhism. Because on the surface we'll see some disagreements, we'll see some differences of opinion, but often the underlying difference is going to be based simply in terms of how each of the traditions is defining the material that they're discussing. Each of the traditions in Buddhism are going to have quite different definitions of things, so that's important to study. Anyway, the Buddha taught gave these various rounds of transmission while he was alive, which covered all the various teachings. And when he passed away, by the way, the Tantra teachings would not be included in this classification of the 3 rounds of transmission, although, according to one version, they're hinted at by the 3rd round. But it's just a classification scheme. In any case, when the Buddha passed away, since none of his teachings were written down, then they held various councils. And the various close disciples, the very highly realized disciples, came together, and they recited the various teachings of the Buddha, and they started to write things down. And they wrote things down in 4 languages of that time, one of which was Pali. And not all of the teachings, however, were written down. There were certain teachings which were kept oral, which were passed on from one generation to another, from master to disciple, and were written down much later. These were the Mahayana teachings, the Mahayana Sutras, and also the Tantrayana Sutras. Now, sometimes we hear various arguments in debate about, what were the authentic teachings of the Buddha? The Hinayana scriptures, which were written down first, these, some people will say, well, these are the only authentic teachings of the Buddha, because the others came later. Whereas from the Mahayana point of view, they would say that, yes, of course, the Mahayana teachings were written down later, came later because they were written down later. They were just passed on orally. And then the argument would go back and say, well, if you say that the Mahayana teachings are not valid as the teachings of the Buddha, well, how do you know that the Hinayana teachings are the valid teachings of the Buddha? Because those weren't written down when the Buddha was alive either. And if those were remembered and written down afterwards, then why can't that also have been the case with the Mahayana teachings as well, that they were written down? And if your only reason is, well, because I don't think so, then that's a very poor reason. So if we look at it in debate form like this, then there's no reason to not accept that some teachings were passed on orally from guru to disciple and written down later. And it was always the method taught by the Buddha to write things and present things with skillful means in languages and type of phraseology that people at the time can understand. And so the later teachings that were written down in Sanskrit, in slightly different styles of language, and that would be in accordance with the skillful means method of writing things in language that people can relate to. So we have these first portion of the teachings which were written down. This became the Hinayana canon. Now, Hinayana is referring to a modest vehicle. Sometimes people translate it as a lesser vehicle or the small vehicle. That's not a very good translation, but rather it can be better translated as modest, a modest-minded vehicle. A vehicle is a vehicle of mind that can take us somewhere to a goal, and the scriptures that speak about it, and it's modest in the sense that it's working for a goal of overcoming our problems and gaining nirvana or liberation. Now, Hinayana is a general term which then had 18 different sub-schools. Now, the Theravada, which is the doctrine of the elders, is just one of the 18. So we shouldn't feel uptight about the term Hinayana, because it's a term which is referring to the general all 18, and the Theravadin is one of them. There were also, the way that it traveled was that the Theravada went down to Sri Lanka, and from Sri Lanka then it spread to Burma, Thailand, and these areas of Southeast Asia. In places like Thailand, it tended to die down after a little while, and later on, again, it came from Sri Lanka once more, was revived, and we have the Theravadin teachings now widespread in Burma, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. Now, some of the other Hinayana schools spread into Central Asia, and we have them going up into areas in Afghanistan, Turkestan, over into what now is Chinese Turkestan, and so they were available in other parts as well. All of these various traditions in Southeast Asia take the Pali Canon as the form of the scriptures. That's divided into the Tripitaka, the three baskets, as most of you are familiar with, and this is written in different scripts in the different countries, but the language is the same. It's all Pali. Now, the Mahayana and the Tantrayana teachings were kept oral, and eventually they were written down, and they were written down in a later style of Sanskrit in India, and they developed in the various monasteries in India. We have a whole tradition of monastic universities like Nalanda, Vikramashila, these places in India, and they were taught there, but it wasn't all codified or organized. We have in the beginning various commentaries starting to be written. We have various debates going on with the Indian schools of philosophy, the Hindu schools of philosophy, which were going on at the time. And some of these great Indian masters wrote very, very famous, very well-known explanations of the sutras of the Buddha. So we have different masters specializing in different areas. I suppose the most famous would be Vasubandhu and Asanga. On the one side, they're commenting on the teachings about the extensive methods for helping others, the stages of the path, and so on. Also about Abhidharma, and which is specific types of knowledge. And we also have other authors like Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, and Chandrakirti commenting on the teachings on wisdom, the theory of voidness, or this absence of fantasized ways of existing. And these texts start to spell out in more detail the intention of the Buddha, and explaining what the sutras were talking about. Now, the Chinese pilgrims started to come to India, the first ones coming around maybe the 2nd century A.D., when these universities were just sort of starting, these monastic universities. And the Chinese pilgrims brought Buddhism back to India. And what their main problem was that it wasn't really very well organized in India at these monastic universities yet. These commentaries were just starting to be written, and basically each of them brought back a large bundle of texts. And their problem was how to organize these material and how to figure out which text was, which sutra was the most definitive one that the Buddha taught. Now, this went through Central Asia. The early route was mostly the Silk Route through Chinese and Russian Turkestan, Afghanistan, Kashmir, and down into India. And we had some Hinayana schools there, which had started to flourish, some Mahayana as well, in these various kingdoms along the route. And things got translated into their languages, and from their languages into Chinese, and it became quite complex. The different masters in China then tried to organize the understanding of these sutras, and some would say that the Lotus Sutra was the supreme, others would say that a different sutra was supreme, and in this way we get the development of the various Chinese schools of Buddhism. Now, this was a very interesting period of time in Chinese history when Buddhism came in. It was just after the fall of the Han Dynasty. During the Han Dynasty, Confucian thought, certain things in Taoism were flourishing, but when the Han Dynasty failed, then people started to lose confidence in some of the more traditional ways of thinking in China, and so they were open to new ideas. But it was a period of time when going into politics was very dangerous because there was so much turmoil, lots of warring states and so on. And so what later becomes called the Neo-Taoist schools start to flourish. These are schools which are talking about withdrawing from public service, which was always the emphasis in Confucian thinking, and to engage in non-activity, which means to just be in harmony with the flow of nature, and basically to calm oneself down to that. There was, because the times were so unsettled, there was a great deal of interest in longevity, trying to find the Western paradise of the eternals, so that one could escape from all the chaos that was going on and live forever. There were lots of physical types of cults as well to try to gain longevity through various physical types of methods. So this was the general atmosphere in which Buddhism came in. In certain areas, there was more interest in magical type of powers to try to win over the more savage type of people who were ruling in certain areas of China, and so certain traditions developed like that. Other traditions, more in the south of China, people withdrew from the chaos that was going on and just stayed in secluded monasteries or retreats, and so more philosophical traditions developed. But the things which appealed to a lot of the people at the time were things which were more in accordance with the general type of thought which was going on at the time. And so not only did Mahayana come, but the Tantrayana also was starting to be written down. And in Tantra there are 4 classes, and only the first 3 classes made its way to China. So one of the things in Tantra which appealed very much to the mentality at the time were the teachings about Pure Land realms and practices to be reborn in a Pure Land realm, particularly Amitabha's realm in the West, since that sounded very similar to the Neo-Taoist idea of a Western paradise where the immortals live. So people became quite fond of this type of practice, but in Buddhism, the whole idea of being reborn in a pure land is to go to a place in which all the circumstances are going to be conducive for being able to gain enlightenment much more quickly. If we can do that, then we'll gain enlightenment quickly, and then we'll be able to come back and continue to help others much more. You see, there's a basic, slightly different way of presenting the path that we find in the Hinayana traditions and the Mahayana traditions. This really is focusing around the idea of what a Buddha is, or who the Buddhas are. Now, in the Hinayana traditions, including the Theravadin, we speak about how there are 1,000 Buddhas in the present world age. And the present Buddha Shakyamuni is the 4th of these, and these 1,000 Buddhas are the ones who will start universal Buddhist religions. Now, that doesn't mean starting non-Buddhist religions like Christianity, Islam, these sort of things. We're speaking about Buddhist universal religions. And so the present one is Shakyamuni, the next one will be Maitreya. And basically, when we look at what is realistic, what we can work for, these all the 1,000 places of these Buddhas are taken. So we can't make any reservation, as it were. There's no places available. The people who are going to become these 1,000 Buddhas have already volunteered, as it were, to do that. So in the Hinayana teachings, the modest-minded teachings, the Buddha explained, well, what is feasible then? It's not really feasible for us to work now to become a Buddha, although in all the Hinayana and Theravadin traditions, it does accept that there are Buddhas, it does accept that Buddhas come from bodhisattvas, and that there's a path for becoming a Buddha. It's just a matter of whether it's feasible or not for us to work towards that now in this present world age. And so from this modest-minded point of view, it's not so feasible. So what can we work for? We can work for becoming liberated ourselves from our uncontrollably recurring problems, or samsara. We can aim for nirvana, and which is a release from our troubles, and to become an arhat, which is a liberated being. And the Buddha also taught that once we actually achieve this state of release from all our troubles, from our uncontrollably recurring problems in existence, then after we die, then we achieve parinirvana, and our mind stream ends like the blowing out of a candle. Now, according to the Mahayana teachings, the vast-minded teachings, the Buddha explained, well, first of all, in these modest-minded teachings, that's a very skillful means, because somebody who scope is modest in the sense that they're not aiming to become someone who's going to start a universal Buddhist religion. They would work towards overcoming their own problems, gaining nirvana, and it's very helpful to think that once I've gained that, then all my troubles are finished, my mind stream will end, I don't have to worry anymore. So it's a skillful way of explaining. In the Mahayana, in the vast-minded teachings, the Buddha explained that, yes, what I said before in terms of the 1,000 Buddhas of this world age is true. However, there are lots of other Buddhas as well. It's not just that there are these thousands who start world religions. There can be and will be many others who don't start universal Buddhist religions. And so it is possible, it is feasible to work towards becoming such a Buddha, and so this would be a more vast-minded scope that one would aim for. And the Buddha also explained that when I said that the mind stream ends when you die after achieving nirvana, well, that technically is not really the case. What I meant was that the mind stream ends its continuity in the same class or the same category, but the mind stream continues, it has no end, and it is possible after that state to work further to continue to overcome all limitations and realize all our potentials so that we can be of benefit to everyone. So this type of aim, this type of explanation is very fitting for those who would be more vast in their scope and who would be willing to work for a longer period of time in order to reach the state not only in which they're free of their problems, but would go further to be able to help everybody else to overcome all limitations, realize all potentials, to help everyone. Which means they go through the modest-minded training, but continue further with additional techniques. So when we think of these Pure Land realms that are so prominent, for instance, in Chinese Buddhism, we're thinking in terms of not just being reborn in heaven and finished, and it's like that we go to paradise, but rather which would be more like a Taoist way of looking at it, but rather the Buddhist way of looking at it is that we only go to this type of realm, or would want to go to that type of realm, in order to have all the conditions to be the most conducive for practicing, for learning, so that we can become a Buddha much more quickly, and then continue to reappear in the ordinary world to help others. We also have the development of Chan Buddhism. Chan Buddhism in Japan becomes Zen, And here we have another line of transmission. Bodhidharma comes now by sea to China through the southern route. And when he arrived in China, he saw that there was a lot of also chaos going on in terms of physical things, and that it would really be very necessary for people to be able to not only get their minds more together, but also to be able to get their bodies more together, their energy more together. And so he developed and explained the various techniques for which became the basis for the martial arts. Now, this also was very much in keeping with what was going on in China at the time, with these various neo-Taoist type of movements in which you had certain, I don't know whether you'd call it armies or what you would call it, but people who did various types of physical culture, going around and trying to defend themselves and defend people from various forces of chaos that was going on historically in China at the time. So again, we have Buddhism adopting in a very practical and skillful type of way to the needs of the country, the needs of the people at the time, and so we get the development of martial arts in Buddhism here coming in the Chan school. In the Chan school also there are a lot of techniques which are very reminiscent of things in the Neo-Taoist movement, in terms of getting more in tune with the natural rhythms of what's going on in nature or in the body. But and so we get the development of Chan Buddhism with many features in it which are reminiscent of what was going on in China in Neo-Taoist thought at the time, in terms of more simplicity and not getting involved in political or other type of widespread activities. Now, from China, it spread to Korea and to Japan. In Japan, we get things becoming mixed now with Japanese culture, and things developing in a certain Japanese style. So, for instance, we look at Zen Buddhism in Japan, then a lot of things become combined with the samurai type of warrior tradition, and so things become much more severe, much less ornate, more ritualized, with very severe type of discipline, which is added there. Also, things become combined a little bit with ideas that come from the Shinto type of beliefs, which is seeing beauty in aesthetics in all sorts of different cultures. And so we get flower arrangement, the tea ceremony, all these sort of things also coming into Zen Buddhism. Things become quite stylized in a very Japanese type of way. In China, there's always been a great emphasis on the rules of monastic discipline and the styles of all the different types of conduct. This again is very much in keeping with a Confucian type of worldview, which wants to see things done in the proper way. You know, Confucius always emphasized rectification of names, that a father should act as a father, a son as a son, a minister as a minister. Things should be done in the right way. And so there's this type of emphasis then in Chinese Buddhism of the way that a monk or a nun should sit, the way that they should talk, the way that they should walk, the way that they should eat. Everything becomes very set in terms of what is the proper way. In Japan, that becomes even more stylized and more formal, in keeping with a Japanese type of approach to things. We don't have, however, in Japan, the monastic rules coming. In China, remember, the Hinayana was something which got divided into 18 different schools, and the Theravadin was one of them. Each of these had a slightly different form of the Vinaya, which are the rules of discipline for the monks and nuns. And so the set of rules that the monks and nuns follow in the Theravadin tradition is one of these. That's why they wear yellow robes. They have various types of practice, various types of rules. In the Chinese case, it comes from one of the other Hinayana traditions. This is the Dharmagupta tradition, which was found in Central Asia. And so the tradition of the monks and nuns' vows is slightly different. About maybe 85% of the vows are going to be the same, but there's going to be slight differences. So the monks and nuns are going to wear slightly different color robes. There'll be slight differences in some of their conduct. This we can see, for instance, in a difference in terms of diet, because the Tibetans, for instance, are going to, in Tibetan Buddhism, their rules of discipline, their monastic order is going to come from a third of another one of these Hinayana traditions, the Mula Sarvastivadin. They wear red robes. Now, we can see one difference, for instance, in diet, and this as well is something that the Buddha taught, that different people, when they are emphasizing a different type of practice, will follow a different type of diet. The Buddha never taught dogmatically one thing, that everybody has to be exactly the same, everybody has to do all these things precisely the same, that there's only one path, one truth, and everybody who doesn't follow that will go to hell. It's not this type of biblical thinking, but rather it's an idea that different people are different, and even one individual at different stages of their life may follow one thing or another. So in the Theravadin way of practicing, then someone who is emphasizing this type of way to develop discipline, the main thing is to develop humility. And so for a Theravadin monk, they're supposed to accept whatever food is given to them. They don't make any demands. They don't lay a trip on anyone. So that means that if when they go begging, somebody gives only vegetables in their bowl, that's what they eat. If somebody gives meat in their bowl, they eat that. The example is used that if a leper's thumb falls off into the bowl, they would eat that. They are supposed to accept whatever they're given. So this is not to make any demands on others, and to develop a feeling of indifference and complete tolerance for everything, that everything is the same. So that would be this level of practice, and for somebody who would need to overcome their strong prejudices, their strong likes. I have to have this type of diet, I can't have that type of diet, I don't like this, I like that, I'm so holy and wonderful, I eat only this kind of food or that. For such a person, it's very helpful for their spiritual development to develop more equanimity, more tolerance, to become indifferent to their diet, and whatever is given to them, they accept and they eat. Now, in the traditions in China, then the main emphasis there, although their rules of discipline are coming from another Hinayana school, the main emphasis there is on Mahayana practice. And when one is putting the main emphasis on compassion for others, then obviously that would extend to the animals as well. And for such a person, then it's important to keep a vegetarian diet. And so we find, as part of the Chinese discipline, it becomes now incorporated into some of the rules, then the Chinese monks are going to follow a vegetarian type of diet. In for a Tantrayana practitioner, Tantrayana or Vajrayana is a subdivision of Mahayana. And as I say, we have the first three divisions in China, going to Japan and Korea as well. But also in the Tibetan tradition, we have all 4 classes. For a Tantrayana practitioner, if we're practicing the first 3 classes of Tantra, in which a great emphasis is placed on purification, purity of the body, cleansing, these sort of things, then again it's quite important to follow a vegetarian diet. But if our main practice is the 4th class of Tantra, then this is the class in which we're working with the various subtle energies in the body, trying to get those energies more focused, more centralized, so that we can get to the more subtle levels of consciousness and energy, to use these like a laser beam to be able to get the most speedy cutting through of our obscurations and the most effective understanding of reality. When we're working with these energy systems in the body, then it may be necessary to eat meat and to eat a heavier type of diet in order to work with these energies in a more controlled type of way. Because if we eat too light of a diet, then these energies tend to become a little bit too chaotic in the body, and again we're going to have difficulty. Whereas if we eat a meat in our diet, then that is a greasier type of diet, tends to weight down the winds and energies in the body a little bit more, so that we can more easily control them, manipulate, and work with them. So the Buddha taught that depending on the type of practice that we're doing, and obviously that can change at different stages in our life, a different type of diet might be recommended, although of course one would always have compassion for the animal and so on that one is eating. But after all, as a human being, there's no way that we can eat or survive without harming others. That's part of samsara. That's part of the all-pervasive problems that we face. And so even if we're a strict vegetarian, still we shouldn't feel holy, because if you look at how things are grown in the farm, obviously a lot of insects are killed, a lot of life is taken in the process of growing vegetables. And so no matter what type of diet we eat, we drink water, we walk on the ground, we breathe, we're going to be taking life. That's part of the whole unfortunate situation of samsara, of our uncontrollably recurring problems. So we see these sort of differences. Now we have this Mahayana type of tradition developing in China. We get the various monastic rules. In China, there's going to be a burning of different pieces of incense and so on the head as part of the ordination for the monks and nuns. We don't have that in the Theravadin tradition. We don't have that in the Tibetan tradition either. And this again is something which is more in keeping with certain type of things which were going on in China at that time, in terms of neo-Taoist practices, in terms of signifying or saying that I want to get out of the attachment to this body and to make an offering of my body in order to be able to help others, and to signify that, to symbolize that, the monks and nuns have some incense burned on spots on their head, either 3, 6, 9, or 12. But again, these are fairly minor differences in keeping with the cultural type of proclivities of the society. Then when Buddhism went from China to Korea, the monastic tradition continued in Korea, but it never made it to Japan. And so in Japan, we don't have a tradition of celibate monks and nuns, ones who don't marry, but rather we get a tradition of temple priests who keep the general householder precepts of not killing, stealing, etc., and they'll have an ordination for that, but it's not the full monks or full nuns ordination, and it's not a tradition of celibacy, although many of the practitioners in the temples and monasteries there will choose to be celibate. but they don't have an actual ordination lineage there in Japan. Also, there'll be certain things that develop in Japan, certain other lineages or sects of Buddhism, which are more in keeping with certain political developments in Japan, the Nichiren tradition, and so on. There are many things that develop there. Also from China, it went down to Vietnam. Now, things continued in India, and also we get now, starting in about the 5th century or so, the Mahayana, including the Tantrayana, which now includes all 4 classes of Tantra, is going to spread out to Southeast Asia again. Remember, we had the Theravadin tradition coming from Sri Lanka up to Burma and Thailand, but the historical records show that it didn't flourish so much in Thailand and Cambodia, this region, from that original movement. But we get a new movement of the Mahayana and Tantrayana coming to this region, and that goes primarily into Indonesia. We get that in Java and Sumatra, here in Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and so the great monuments of Borobudur in Indonesia, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, these are built from the Tantrayana background. Although these things developed there, and we get some later Indian masters coming over to the Golden Isles, it's called, which some people identify with Sumatra, to get some lineages back to India, but nevertheless these things didn't continue in this region. They died down for various reasons. Islam came to Indonesia and Malaysia, and a new wave of Theravadin Buddhism comes from Sri Lanka up to Thailand and over to Laos and Cambodia. Now, the Buddhism in India continued to develop and flourish, and we have all these various commentaries by these great Indian masters being written, and a great deal of debate goes on in the monasteries between the Indian schools, the classical Indian schools of philosophy. These would be the various Hindu schools, Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, these sort of schools, and also with the Jain schools, and the whole tradition of emphasis on logic and debating occurs. There's some great Buddhist masters like Dinaga, Dharmakirti, who write a great deal of commentaries on logic and on presenting the teachings from a logical point of view of proving refuge, proving that it's possible to have an omniscient mind, proving that it's possible to attain enlightenment, all these sort of things which are very necessary in the debates back and forth with the non-Buddhist schools. And the Tantra gets written down completely, and we get the Tibetans coming onto the scene. Oh, I forgot to mention, in terms of the scriptures that we had in China, the texts were translated into Chinese, and they used various different types of translation systems. They initially tried using some transliteration of Sanskrit into Chinese. That's how we get a lot of these mantras, for instance, and dharanis, these long things which are recited, which are in phonetic Chinese, which is a phonetic of Sanskrit. And also they use a style of translating things into terminology from Neo-Taoism and Confucianism, which are going to be a little bit similar to the Buddhist terms. They use various different types of techniques for translation. One of the features that we get then in the Chinese canon is that, first of all, it's a slightly different set of material that we have in the Tripitaka, in the Pali canon. Pali canon was just this first set of teachings that were written down, In the Chinese canon, we have a lot of the Mahayana scriptures as well, and some of the Tantrayana ones also, which came to China. And it is all written in various Chinese characters. There are several versions of a number of the different sutras, because many of them were translated 3 or 4 times over a period of history. And when it goes over to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, they continue to keep them in the classical Chinese, but each of these regions is going to read it according to their own way of pronouncing the Chinese characters. So again, the written word is going to say the same. And it flourished in China, Buddhism, and got the official support during the Sui dynasty, the Tang dynasty, and after a while, though, there were some persecutions, and it died down a little bit, and sort of merged with a lot of the Taoist and Confucian ideas when the Chinese imperial court no longer gave its patronage to the Buddhists in the middle of the Tang dynasty, and again went back to the Confucian ideas with the development of what's called Neo-Confucianism. Okay. Now, it was developing in India. We got the full development, and this is when the Tibetans come on the scene. And the Tibetans first come down to India around the 8th century, and they invite some Indian masters back to Tibet. And we get one great figure called Padmasambhava. The Tibetans know him as Guru. As Guru Rinpoche. And he brought the teachings, along with some others, to Tibet. There was a great debate that went on at that time. You see, this was the period of time when the Tibetans were politically extremely strong, and they had even conquered the Chinese capital at Chang'an. And then this powerful Tibetan king had to decide where he was going to bring Buddhism into Tibet from. He had both a Chinese wife and a Nepalese wife. And there was a debate that went on, and the Indian master won this debate, and so the Tibetans decided that they would take Buddhism from India. Now, of course, there may have been some political considerations in this as well, because Tibet had just conquered the capital of China, and so it would be a little bit strange to accept the religious beliefs from the people they had conquered.